Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of GameCamp webinar. Today we will have a really interesting session that will be focused on the founder's journey, like the two companies, how they were growing, their competences, the views of founders and the people who were like changing the organization. So let's invite to the stage our amazing speakers. So let's invite Johnatan, who is the founder of Me Pipa Studios. Hello, Johnatan.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Mariusz. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk here. Looking forward to it.
Thank you, Johnatan. Then let's invite Filippo De Rosa, who is Chief Growth Officer at Traplight Games. Filippo, you are mute.
Well spotted. Thank you for the invite. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is wide awake.
Yeah. And then let's invite Rudy. Rudy, who is Gaming Growth Manager at Google. Hello, Rudy.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here, Marius. I was speaking at some of the roundtables before, so people who attended them, you may notice I got a haircut and a beard trim because they've opened up in Ireland. So great to be able to be partaking again. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. And let's invite Leonardo, who is the head of AppDev Brazil. Hello, Leonardo.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here with Johnatan and everybody so we can learn more about their journey and participate in the final roundtable. Thank you for the invite, Marius.
Actually, today it's really we have really international webinar because Leonardo and Johnatan are from Brazil. Filippo is in Italian, living in Netherlands, working for the Finnish company. Rudy is from UK. I'm from Poland, so it's like really a lot of countries combined together. I'm sure it will be really amazing session. So, not spending more time on that, let's actually invite our first speaker, Johnatan. And of course, let's remember, going back. Please, all the people who are looking at the session, please join us at the Slido. Just go to the Slido and type GameCamp as the name of the event, and then you can ask questions and actually join the discussion. So Slido and then GameCamp as the name of the event. So let's invite Johnatan from Pipa Studios, who actually will talk about his view and his challenges he saw in his journey, and actually how he was overlooking that, and how actually everyone who is thinking about working for a mobile gaming company or founding the mobile company, he should really look at those challenges and how to work with them. Johnatan, stage is yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Mariusz. So first of all, let me introduce myself and my company. I am the founder of Pipa Studios, and I'm very lucky, and I think we are all very lucky to work with gaming, which is something amazing, and which is something that has a bright future. And I've been working since 2003. That's a long way to go. I started working with a web gaming platform at that time, at the, let's say, at the mid stages of internet. I am originally a developer, so I have a technical background that became CEO. We launched the studio in 2012, and our target was especially Brazil and Latin America, and our product was bingo games. So this is something that we have been working before, not in the social space, not in the mobile space, and then we entered the mobile and social space in 2012. It was a very quick journey for us to become the main game in Brazil for bingo players, and then we start expanding to other countries and other geographies as well. Well, we had a very bootstrapped beginning. We started only with 3 people, 2 developers and 1 artist, and nowadays we are 80 people. So, well, a part of being blessed to work with gaming, which is something that we all are, I want to share with you some of my experience in building this company, things that I learned doing, things that I learned by mistakes, and some things that we also learned with others. So let's begin with the journey. I will talk about these 5 topics. Okay, first of all, my perspective as a founder, and which are the main challenges of starting and running a company, how I see the gaming industry nowadays, and why this is important for you guys that are thinking about working in a gaming company or starting a gaming company. Things that I believe that are deal makers that you should really take care and pay attention to them, and things that I believe that can hurt you if you don't pay attention to them, which I call the deal breakers. And then in the end, we're going to talk about, for me, the most important topic of this conversation, about people and the challenges that we have in the gaming space and for any startup company. Well, so everything begins with the founders. You may want to be a single founder, or you have a team of founders, but it's all about you in the beginning. So it's kind of, you have to take care and to take responsibility of every aspect in the beginning. And starting a company is a very emotional journey, and it will require from you lots of strength and lots of focus and especially emotional strength. But never forget that we are doing something that we love, and this is something very precious in our life. It's a very intense journey. I mean, it is sometimes frustrating, but it's mostly rewarding, and the rewards come in many ways, right? Not only of achieving success, but you see a lots of people playing your game. You see they are emotionally connected to your game as well. You build up a team, you build up a company. It's a very intense journey. So things that I think that are extremely important from an emotional perspective, an emotional competence for the founder or for the founders. Persistence. I think this is the number one. You have to be persistent about what your dreams are, about what your desires are when you start a company. But never forget that persistent doesn't mean stubbornness. So be open-minded as well. Be open-minded for change. Accept that some things will fail in the way, and also listen. Be open to listen to your people and to the players. Then definitely resilience. You will we will go through a very emotional journey, as I mentioned to you, and there will be bad days, there will be good days. So I think it's very important for you to start developing this kind of thick skin. That's the way I call here. You have many ways to prepare for this, and this is something you should always have in your notebook. And finally, starting a company is a lot about being creative, because you find many problems in the way, and your job is to find ways out of those problems, right? So creativity is really important in starting up a company. Well, a few things about how I see the gaming landscape these days. So the industry as a whole is thriving like never before. If you follow the public companies, you've seen that their multiples have increased. I think finally there's a lot of recognition in Wall Street and financial world about the gaming companies, also in venture capital. So I think this is a very nice timing to go into gaming, or to invest your career, to invest your life into gaming. At the same time, the barriers to entry have increased as well. So you can still have the dream of starting by yourself or just a few people and be successful, this is still valid. But you have players with deep pockets, lots of investments also going into gaming and producing content these days. So the industry is really, making this transition. But we are in a stage that both things are still valid. So you can start your company and be very successful competing with these big guys. Well, this is the way I see the industry is, let's say, splitting today, right? So you have pretty much like in the movie or TV industry. I think this is how the gaming industry is converging. So you have people and companies which are creating content, right, which are responsible for the creative aspect, and you have people responsible for publishing, which are basically responsible for acquisition and retention and all the economic metrics of the game. Well, publishing, it's overall it's a data business, and you have to be very good at data. You have to be very proficient at data. If you're a publishing only business, or if you look at a publish only business, usually they wrap up lots of different contents, different games, right? And they try to market them. So for them, it's a very high diversification and a lower risk for them, because they have multiple content and they can afford to have a few failures. If you look at content, of course, it's a content business, and creativity is the key here. And as probably most of us, we will start with a single title and then move on. But the single title is extremely important in the beginning. So we are kind of concentrating everything into one content. So our risks as a content provider is higher. In our case, in Pipa, we did both. So we created the content, and we also published, and we managed the acquisition streams and the retention and the customer relationship into the same company. So for us, and if that's the case for you too, you have to look at creativity and data as your key elements for success. And you really cannot afford to be less than excellent at them if you want to succeed. Well, the hard truth with content is that you have tons of lots of content and new games these days. You just go to the App Store, or you go to Google Play, you go to Steam, you go to any platforms, you see there immense amount of content, and there's a very high concentration of revenue in a few titles, right? And most titles will fail, and the other number, and a very large number of titles will kind of come to break even, but very hardly achieve that success. So this is the game you're entering when you're entering with content. It's a very risky, high reward game, and this is something that you have to face, right? And this is why it's very important that we try to do everything right from beginning. So things that I would consider if you guys are thinking about starting a company or going forward with launching a new game. So nowadays, as I mentioned before, you have deep pocket guys coming into the gaming space. So you have big budgets and small budgets. So I would consider that in another perspective, talking about content, then you have those games that are really mainstream, that have a very large player base, right? They can appeal for a large audience, and then you have this very niche specific games. I consider that in our history we entered a niche space, right? Because we entered with a bingo game in Brazil, right? And this is where we started. This is where we took strength to develop into other genres and to develop into other geographies. So what I consider you to do is to kind of follow this blue line, right? Consider your budget, consider your capabilities, and consider which kind of audience you want to attack. So I would say the smaller the budget, the more niche like your audience should be in order for you to achieve success. Of course, you can have a small budget and be mainstream. That's still the case, but then you just increase your risk of achieving success, right? Then let's talk about the deal makers, things that will help you to get there. First of all, this is something that every founder has to understand, which is the lifetime value and the cost per acquisition, LTV, and CPI gain, right? For those of you that are not familiar with this term, so the lifetime value is just a measure of how much value, of how much money, basically, you can make or you're expected to make from a new player, from a new install. And the cost per install is just how much you pay on average for that install, right? So if you plot that on time, what you can expect from a cost per install perspective, that it's gonna start somewhere, let's say around, it's very specific, but let's say somewhere around 50 cents of a dollar to $20 or something like this. But it already starts at some point high, right? Medium from high. And then as you progress with your game, it's very normally expected that your CPI will also increase. And I'm only taking CPI here, and I could also take into account not only the cost to acquire that player, for the player to install your game, but also the cost to retain that player, right? So you do many things to retain that player, but let's just stick with CPI for a while. And what you should expect from a lifetime value perspective is that in the beginning, it's going to be very, very close to zero, right? Until you can kind of understand what your LTV is. And at some point, your LTV has to become higher than your cost per acquisition, right? And this is where you start making money marginally by every install, right? And this is really what you should expect. Your LTV will start from a lower base, but it has to progress, and eventually it has to overreach your cost per install, right? And at this inflection point, where they meet, where this both numbers meet, this is where you should concentrate the most of your acquisition budget, because this is where you start having a return on every install, right? So anything below that range, you should consider kind of, just the ramp up revenue that you need for your game to start having players and to start having traction. Well, going for content now. So the Holy Grail, and what if I would say, give me just one thing that we should take care when you create a gaming company. That thing is player loyalty, right? So I'd say really think about investing in community building from day one, even before you have the game, or just test your ideas, test your, I don't know, screenshots, test your art, whatever. And from the day you can launch, also listen to your player base, listen to their feedback. Okay, it's hard to listen. It looks like it's an easy thing to do, but it's very hard to listen, because you listen to many things, but then in the end you're gonna you're gonna start making some sense about the feedback that the players give you, right? When you're thinking about content, this is my choice of content when I think about gaming, but I think really about making the game into a franchising type of game. What do I mean by that? Try to create a game that will engage the player or your player base for as long as you can, right? We, in the gaming space, we have many ways to approach when it comes to content. You can create extremely casual games, right? Or you can create very hardcore tech and art intensive type of games. But you should always have this idea that it's very important for you that the player engage with your game and stay engaged for as long as you can, because the effects that you have on the lifetime value are immense. And then it makes all the difference in terms of this game working out for you or not. So think again, and think when you think about the game, try to make its content really last for very long and give the support that it needs to get there, right? Just thinking about movies, and I like to do this parallel, but aim for something like Star Wars. of course, Star Wars is a mega production, but then you have also small franchises that are not mega productions. But think about something that can last, and the player that can engage for a very long time, right? Again, playing game is an emotional kind of relation. So the player has an emotional relation to the game. Once it has played and it's attached to the game, it's very likely that, you know, if you provide good content, they will attach and keep attaching in the future. Now, going into the implementation of your company, always choose your partners wisely, right? Especially in the beginning, because you need very good partners. You need business partners. You need good business partners. So those are the people that you can count on especially on the hard times and on the hard decisions. You have to have good coworkers, you know, people that also will not only help you, but, you know, kind of take you to your best, right? And also take care of your providers, depends on how much you want to outsource. But, you know, the industry now is very complex in that sense, and you have very good providers. And it's very important that if you go this way, you find good providers as well. So now the things that you should look at, so you don't kill your potential. What I consider the deal breakers. Now again, let's get back to the marketing plan. So what I would consider a bad marketing plan is a wrong timing, right? So a wrong spending timing. Usually it's too early, too fast. It also might be too late, right? Or too slow. But usually it's too early, too fast. So consider those your LTV and your cost per acquisition, which are very measurable, right? I'm not going into details about how to build an LTV models, and I believe there will be sooner another session here about acquisition, and probably it's going to be discussed in more detail. But you should understand that the very right time for you to really ramp up your investment is when your LTV is higher than a CPI. Anything before that, it's kind of, you should still be working on your core engine, on your game, on your stability, and on everything, on your community building, so you can reach that. And again, if you're doing the marketing and acquisition by yourself or with a partner, but anyway, you should always really be very, very concerned about maximizing your ROI on any dollar that you invest. This is totally important. This is precious, and this is absolutely fundamental for you to be successful. Now, the other thing with the marketing plan, what you can expect, again, over time, is that in the beginning, you're going to spend a lot of money into acquisition, so new players, right? And eventually, as your game, let's say, gets mature, then you're gonna be spending more of your resources into retention, right? And this is something that is very, very expectable, and you should do it this way. So have this in mind as you start as well. By the way, you should already be thinking about retention even before you launch, right? This is something that can be overlooked by game designers as well, and by game companies, right? So they think about a lot about new players and the experience of new players, but your monetization will come from your retained players. So think about retention from day one. Going back to the product and creative aspect of starting a company, I call love without criticism, right? So of course you love your games, and we all love our games, right? And I think when you're thinking and conceptualizing your game, you and your team always should fall in love, like for your decisions, for your characters, for your gameplay, for your for your script, you know, for your history, but always be critical and open for criticism, right? So this is something that has to be worked with your team, and be critical, especially in the sense that what the player might show you later on, or even before that you know, this decision that you made at some point in time is not the best decision. There's another way to go. So always validate your premises and A/B test everything that you can, but especially your core variables, right? Because you're gonna have to make a lot of decisions game-wise and content-wise. So always A/B test. And nowadays there are plenty of tools and ways of doing very good and very reliable A/B testing. Now, going to talk about the technology, right? So don't let your stack, your tech stack break you, right? So when you choose your tech stack and you have to make these decisions, have in mind or aim for 10 years, right? So try to get the technologies that will be very strong in 10 years, or just the ones that you believe that will be strong in 10 years. Because this is a very reasonable, let's say, life cycle for a technology and also for a game. And in the beginning, try to keep your stack as small as possible, right? Eventually, you have to extend your stack and add new technologies or add new APIs or add new, different kind of architectures and infrastructure. But in the beginning, I would say try to keep your stack small, right? This is very important for you as a kind of bootstrapping strategy for a small company. Now, and to end my talk here, let's talk about people, which I consider nowadays is the greatest challenge of all, not only for gaming companies, but for any company, especially in the tech online space. So what has changed, or what has accelerated? Which kind of changes have accelerated lately? We are living now in this COVID and hopefully very soon post-COVID world, right? And remote work nowadays, it's very debatable, but it's kind of looking the new normal, right? I think it's still soon to just to say that and write in stone, but definitely remote work will be has come to stay, and this is the future. And finally, competition for talent in the tech online space has reached really like a point of no return, and it's really getting crazy out there, right? So nowadays, if you work if you are a developer, if you are an artist, if you are a content creator, if you're a writer, if you work in acquisition or data, you basically can work anywhere, right? You can work for a whole range of companies anywhere in the world. So kind of the salaries and the compensation aspects have changed a lot as well. So it's very, very difficult. I think this is the biggest challenge for any company nowadays in the tech online space and also in the game space, which is retaining, not only getting talent, but also retaining talent. So a few things about just what is important really for someone, what is into the bucket when someone thinks about working for a company, or a particular company or not. So of course, the first thing is money, right? Everyone needs to live, and everyone wants to thrive as well. But then, differently from, let's say, maybe a few decades ago, where I think money was the most important thing, nowadays there are other things that also compete with money. And I'd say the second thing is lifestyle, right? So everyone wants to have a very good balance between their private lives and their work lives. And lifestyle has become very important, and the companies cannot ignore, that they should help their workers and their employees to find the right balance of lifestyle. Then the environment, right? So people, and I guess this is especially at these times where people are working remotely, right? It has presented very big new challenges for us. And one thing is the difficulty to connect to others and to our co-workers in the company, right? So of course we can work and be productive, working remotely and IMing and calling, just working this way. But it's kind of, we still have to find a way to really connect with the people, right? And this is where the environment, your company environment, will play a very key role. So I think it's very important that we do our best in order to make the people feel connected to the company and to the to his colleagues. And this is a very big challenge nowadays. Then development, of course, everyone wants to work in a place where they feel they are learning something and they are getting better every day. So this is something that you should also have in mind, never forget. And then finally, purpose, which is something that looks almost philosophical, but the truth is everyone is always trying to find its purpose and the reasons why we are doing this. And I think you as a founder or as a manager, you should help with your people, with your employees to find this purpose in professional life as well. Well, that said, so how can you compete for talent? Well, for a startup or for a small company, small studio gaming company, you don't have the luxury to compete only on money, right? So you have to pay very good, and you pay very good salaries, but you should go all the way. So you have to think about the lifestyle, you have to think about the environment, you have to think about the purpose. So what is my suggestion for you guys? Well, first of all, you have a dream. Everything starts with a dream, right? That can translate into a vision, but you have a dream. So you have to build a story. You have to be able to tell your story to your people so they can join you and they can believe in you and believe in your story. This is something absolutely fundamental. The second thing is you have your values, and this is a good point, because when you start something, so when you start a company, the company values in the beginning ultimately will be your values, right? It will be the founder's values, and sometimes they will, or somewhere they in the future they will morph into company values, because they will. New things will be added, new people will join, but fundamentally it's your values in the beginning. So start with your dream, tell your history, practice how to tell your history, and also reinforce your values. So what do you believe, how things should be, and what is important for you. So these two things will translate into leadership, and this is something that really people will expect, right, from any company. But be a strong leader and practice this from day one. And eventually, when you become a good leader, you also have people that start to share your values and your dream and your ambitions, right? And eventually that becomes your company culture, right? And this is where it doesn't mean that the leadership is less important. It's probably even more important, but somehow when you have a strong company culture, then what you had in the beginning, your dream and values, are kind of permeated through all the company. And this will just build your solid foundations for a successful company, right? Okay, guys, so I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much. So just for the final remarks, never forget to have fun. We're all doing this, and we should have fun all the way through, especially working with what we do, right? Gaming. If you never worked with gaming, or if you just think, that working with gaming is always, a wonderful thing. Well, it's not always a wonderful thing. It's very hard work. It's a lot of competition. It's difficult, but it's very nice to work with games. Midway through, you as a founder, in the beginning, it's all about you, but then midway through, it's all about your team, and you have to work for your team. That's a conscious decision that you have to make as a founder. Get your player in the center of your decisions, okay? Fundamental. This is fundamental, especially when you're creating content. Build a company that lasts, okay? And this is very connected to creating a strong culture. And never forget why you're doing this, okay? So that said, thank you very much, guys. And let's continue.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. We have quite a few questions here on Slido, so maybe I'll ask a couple and see if Marius wants to ask a couple. One thing that small developers always ask me, even when we go to events, is should they, maybe focus only on developing and choose a publisher for their first game, or is it better to kind of go all in and suffer all in the first and build that publishing competence from the beginning? What's your opinion, and why did you choose? I would be curious, why did you choose to do both instead of going with the publisher for your first game?
Excellent question. Well, we started the company in 2012, right? The industry has changed a lot ever since. So I think it's very clear now that you have these roles as a content provider, content creator, and as a publisher. We kind of didn't have, this many options at that time. We had to do both. We kind of didn't have the choice, right? So nowadays, if you have the choice, I would say, if you find a good partner to publish your games, and a trustable partner, and there are many people to talk to, I would say that if your passion is creating content, maybe that's a very good thing, a very reasonable thing to do, right? And focus and concentrate on creating content, because this is what you're good at, and then you don't have to do all the other, let's say, data tasks of acquiring, retaining, and taking care of these aspects. But if you feel like you can do it, I mean, publishing a game is very easy. Marketing a game it's not so easy. Then it starts to become complicated, right? But there are many ways to go. If your passion is in content, I think it's very reasonable that you find a partner and concentrate on being a content creator.
Thanks. That's great. Marius, can I ask another question?
Sure,
okay?
go ahead.
The other thing that I get asked a lot, like people that are starting and they just created their first game or they're working on that game, is how to make that into a company. And I think you answered a lot on that about that during your presentation. But people are curious to know, what was the hardest thing? What would you do differently in this journey from becoming a developer, right, that you said you were before, to a CEO and the founder of a company? What was the most difficult thing that you came into, or any things that you would do differently, you kind of regret a little bit, that you would like to share with us?
Well, I could go on and on here, but I would say that it's not really about regretting, but it's something that it's not easy to see in the beginning. And then it becomes very, very clear some way through, is that when you start a company, and let me just give you a number, right? But maybe when you have 15 people or 20 people, that's kind of a limit where you really know everyone as a founder, right? They know you, well, you know how they work, you know how they feel, they know how you feel. It's a very straightforward connection. But then at some point there, when you have 30 or 40 or 50 people, you don't have this let's say this close connection to the people anymore. So this is where really the culture has to kick in, right? And this is something that wasn't clear for me as a founder, honestly, and it became very clear to me eventually. So I would say, really try to get your values into the company culture as soon as you can, right? So people can help you do this transition, because it will be fundamental and very important for you. And sometimes it happens very very quick, and you don't notice.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So please actually stay with us for Q&A and discussion at the end. And actually, one comment, before we go to the next, question, someone on the Slido was mentioning that, at today's we have just mails. It was just kind of, accident in the way that, if you look at our webinars at GameCamp.io, you can see that we had a lot of this year and last year, and at some of them we have just more males than women, and some of them we have more women than males. So again, we are not really looking at that aspect. We're just trying to make sure that we actually have really interesting stuff for the audience. So said that, if you know some women that have like amazing stuff to show, please really contact us. We'll be happy to share their stories. Okay, said with that, thank you, Johnatan. And then let's invite our next speaker, Filippo. He will be sharing a bit, different perspective of growing the company, because in this case, he was rather like, taking over the company and, having the task to change it, perspective and change the growth as well. Filippo, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Mariusz. Yeah, well, Johnatan set a pretty high bar, so let's see if I can at least meet it. Well, yeah, this is really a bit of a story of what not to do, I guess, because I'm not a founder, and I'm more of a sort of an agent of change, and I'm not going to, say much about me, except my proudest achievements are mysteriously achieving fatherhood, and also that 5 years ago I worked for a couple of years at a pretty successful studio called Pixelberry, and before I left the US and came back to Europe, I promoted somebody I'd hired 2 years before to replace me, and I think that's an achievement in my book. But anyway, at work, I believe that getting better is a never-ending quest, and I am at the moment in charge of all the things that typical studios worry about a lot, want to care about a lot, but they're not sure how to. So that's everything involving growth-related matters, from analytics to ad monetization, UA, marketing, etc. But essentially what I really do is listen to a lot of challenges, help solve them, empower others, especially to solve them, and asking good questions, because there are never any stupid questions, only stupid answers. But anyway, if you really want to know more about me, last slide, there's a LinkedIn link. So let's not spend any more time about me. So Traplight, where I'm working right now for just over a year now. Well, they've been around for 10 years, and it's just another wonderful studio full of really smart people with great intentions. So that's what it's all about, and I think I'm kind of echoing Jonathan's points from before. What's really interesting as my first experience with a Finnish company, I mean, we all know about Finland and their success stories, so I tend to call it, the kingdom of gaming, because the peer pressure is quite high, the expectations are high, it's a tight-knit community, they all know each other, and everyone wants to be the next Supercell, and that kind of really, puts a lot of pressure. But what really caught my attention was this line that I added here on the slide of how, they describe themselves in their introduction. If it's not fun, they'll change it. And, they really try to be the best in what they do, with their shared passion for game development. So yeah, for a decade they've been developing, and then they started getting into their own development and publishing their own games on mobile. Of course, they had a pretty nice success when they started, but then they moved on to a bigger and better project, which is the one that I'm wearing on my t-shirt, called Battle Legion. And got some venture funding. So 3 years ago, Battle Legion started, and a few months later, it was put into Google beta in what we call the eternally long soft launch. So what happened? What happened next? And just as a side note, that's a group picture from a little while ago. So I'm not there, but I added myself with a little festive hat right at the top. So the first do not key takeaway is, don't copy everything and don't innovate everything. Because it's amazing to see how in every studio there is always still this amazing conflict between making something beautiful that you want to play yourself and making money. And it's a very important conflict because it's disruptive and an integral part of the business and the creative development process. But who should be in charge of that is, the leadership team. And that leadership team moderates and mediates the balance between these two through a system of clearly defined values and clearly stated objectives. But we should never make the mistake to run the company just as a pure democracy, which is very easy to do when you're a small group of people and everyone has a strong voice. But we'll come back to this a little bit later. So, we got into the soft launch, right? And innovate everything to make something really new. And, there was something that people loved about this while they were developing it. Because the game was called Battle Slides, there is this mechanic of swiping to find opponents. And even to the extent of somebody calling it Tinder for gaming. But the numbers eventually suggested that talking about something a little bit more familiar like battles and legions was a bit more effective. But nobody lost the feeling of innovation. I mean, the concept of massive battles is not easy for many to develop, and certainly looks very nice and crisp and clean the way we've made it. And you get to see all this really fast-paced action, even if you don't play it on your device, but you play it on a big screen. So that's a practical example of, you can't, you don't necessarily need to copy everything or innovate everything, but you can sort of find a good balance there. The point is that when we went into the soft launch, you get into the sense of, I have to sort of try to finish this, but the game really never is finished, right? This is the thing about going from being a pure game developer to actually running a game. When you're great at making games, it's not really difficult to also be great at running them. Skills can be taught, but the attitude, right, is hard to teach. So if you had a positive and success-oriented attitude to making a game, then you can actually run the game as well. And you can always change, pivot, remove the entire community that you have now and rebuild it from scratch. If you're afraid, that's just a choice. And no one told you to be afraid, because, hey, Supercell tanks games that 99% of us would be screaming home about. So it's important to kind of not panic, breathe for a second, and really dumb it down to some pretty simple questions. Does it retain? Which means, is it fun fundamentally? Does it make money? Well, then it can grow. And most importantly, probably, can you continue building content on it that is economically viable? Meaning, going back to what Johnatan was saying about LTV versus CPI, if making content for this game will end up costing more and more and more, and then on top of that, you put the cost for an install, then the unit economics won't hold for very long. At that point, if it's economically viable, then what you're looking at here is you're making a TV series, basically. You're not making a movie, so it's not finished. It goes on forever until, of course, 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons of that TV series, maybe it's time to move on to another series. And if you want to be more focused, in answering those questions, those simple questions, then don't just look at it globally, split it by platform and, you know, tier 1 geographies and say, well, how is my retention on iOS tier 1, Android tier 1, etc. And then you can hit the launch button. You don't need to stay in soft launch forever, constantly aiming for higher and bigger and better numbers. And as, you know, an example of this, here are the numbers. Well, these are the percentages in the player base of people at each rank, because there is a ranking system in Battle Legion. And when we launched, we had 10 ranks. You know, was that enough? Was it too much? Well, as we progressed through time, we kept adding ranks, and people kept on growing. You know, the players kept on growing and consuming the content. And you know, the cool thing about this plot here is it's the non-payers. So people even who weren't even paying continued, you know, growing and enjoying the content. So it never ends. And because we are speaking about, you know, now we're moving to the launch and the live operations of the game, from this point onwards, in the corner, there is a little QR code to keep people awake. They can scan it, download the game, and start playing it. So people can stay awake while listening to the presentation. The third do not do is try to solve everything now, which is always this sense of urgency that we have when we're a small group of people. We're fast moving and we're scrappy. Getting things done, it is easy to forget that everyone has skills and experience that they can bring to the table, and everyone can own and everyone can lead if they wish to. So, you know, two things can be solved today, and one thing can be solved later, for example. And you really need to focus on the things that you can solve today, because when you're not printing money, you need to have some victories to keep fueling that positive attitude and, of course, the high morale. Because running a TV series or running gaming as a service is a marathon, not just a sprint. So it's important to keep at it. And as an example of this, we really, again, keeping it really simple, stupid, we ask ourselves very simple questions. Can we build it? Do we want to build it? Does anyone want to play it, right? And this is how we got to the eventual launch after the soft launch in July last year, with a pretty minimal feature set, minimal content, not great polish, but started with a very nice bang in any event. And we kept on going. So this is good after a long period in soft launch where maybe morale could be a little bit shaky because you've been too long in a soft launch. You know, finally you launch and you start seeing action in your numbers and players' reviews, star ratings, and so on. It's very good to keep the team going and start building that content treadmill that is required to run the service. The next thing is to believe that everything is flat because you're a small group is really a bit of an illusion. You know, opinions matter, definitely, but results matter much, much more. And how do we obtain results? With structure, but not overhead. A flat organizational structure, it is a structure when it's flat, it essentially means a faster and leaner system, reducing the space between executives and employees, right? But wait a minute, we have a leadership team, we have team leads, yes, because in a small studio, we tend to have a tendency to hiring more experienced people, right? So what do the most experienced do? Well, they should set and define a road, a strategy that sets that culture and that tone in the way we do our work and helps define those roles and responsibilities that the team leads are building, the roles in their teams. And delegate, empower, and trust. That's the most important thing. Through a set of values, you stand back and you let the experts do the work. You should never be indispensable to get something done if you are in a leadership team. So if you are the smartest person in the room and you're the only one talking, then you're doing something fundamentally wrong. You should keep your mouth shut unless absolutely necessary to intervene. And so what is that guiding set of values, right, that has driven us to this better flat structure? These are the values we have now, and I will show you how we got there in a second. But a thriving business with dedicated people is based on a strong culture that stands on a set of shared values. So I think Johnatan as well mentioned some of these things. Great values, great culture, great games. That's the idea. And those values are these values are the cornerstone of what we care about, what we believe will make us successful, and the ways of doing our work. And so we came to this from another set of values, which were more focused on just, prototyping, developing, and prototyping quickly new concepts. And then we hired an external coach, not because of course, there are people who are experts in the subject, but it's good to get an external perspective. And that helped us become better in a more organized business, to shift from, kind of this task list of values that were good to get us to where we got at that point. But then we had to start becoming the company that ran games as well, not just made the games. So we focused on just doing a number of exercises to build these values.
Filippo?
Yes.
I would like to actually ask you the question. You were talking a lot about values, about specific beliefs, and how to actually make sure that in general, that the people who are you hiring and the people who are in the organization actually they really believe in those values, and they live with those values.
That's a very good question. I think recruitment is certainly an important step, especially in the first sort of 50 hires. They really set the culture of the company. You have to have a number of key people in the process of selecting that are not just the founders, the CEO, but also other teams, other functions of the company, to kind of look at the person from different perspectives and see that they do manifest the values that we believe in. Because normally I hire because I need somebody and I'm quite biased by an urgent need, but I need to get second and third opinion, especially when it's the first 50 hires. You have to be a little bit more careful, because that person could be a bad apple, and then it's bad news, really. On the other hand, you can also find somebody really good that lives your values nicely and influences you in an even better direction, which so far has been exactly like that.
But if we actually keep that topic hiring, so do you think it's which kind of approach works better? It's better in some way to hire people from the market that they have experience, maybe they have some stuff that you need, or it works better to develop those people, especially for people who will be kind of first employees, or one of the first ones, but then at that specific point you you kind of meet managers and then sometimes managers of the managers.
When you are making a first hire and something very new, that's pretty strategic. And so it's kind of important to have somebody with some level of experience, depending on where you're at with the company and so on, and the funding. And but like I said before, attitude, you can't really teach. Skills, yes. So, we hired recently, not too long ago, an analyst. And we already have a data team. But we hired a very junior analyst who had a very good attitude, really great spirit, and really reflected our values, and is learning super fast. So with the right attitude and the right set of values to back it up, this person is now set up to succeed and learn very quickly, and they are grabbing every opportunity. So, this is great because it's an example of what really matters is not the skills, but the attitude. Of course, if that was our first data hire, you would need a little bit more experience. But, then you need to, that's a different problem. How do we pay them, etc.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you for the amazing questions, Mariusz. Onto the fifth point of not doing is do not fall into the trap of looking at everything, which is very easy to do. This is a business that has no official source of truth. Pick your source of truth and validate it and stick as religiously as you can to it, because many times we look at the same metrics from different dashboards, and what we're actually seeing is different versions of the truth. And there is a reason why they're called KPIs, key performance indicators, because if you think about it, that's what they ultimately are. They are indicators, and you can try to get them as accurate as you want, but they will never be perfectly accurate. And that's a difficult pill to swallow, I know, but it's an important pill to swallow. It is always good to have some form of data governance to check discrepancies and not accept insane discrepancies, but ultimately stick to your sources of truth. Because when you have all the quantitative metrics, you combine those to the qualitative feedback and metrics that you have, which are all the community's feedback, the reviews, the star ratings, etc., etc. And as an example of that, we use a very simple system. There's lots of systems out there, but again, keeping it simple, stupid. Goal, question, metric. This is a screenshot from Forrester explaining the system a little bit and how we practically used it to get to the data that was shown before in slide 7 with the player rankings and their adoption of the rankings. But what works for us doesn't, in fact, necessarily work for you or anybody else. It works for us, that's great. If it didn't work for us, we might have changed the system altogether. So the second last not to do here is follow the herd, which is very typical in a small industry, to feel lonely and so look at everyone else and try to copy not just the games, but also the way we work. And again, hundreds of frameworks out there to do many different things, from development to building objectives, OKRs, to, goal, question, metric, to build analytics. Again, if you want to do something that is better, then you should, for you. I have been to a few different companies in different parts of the world, in the US and in Asia. And there really are no great, perfect companies, but just people, again, with great intentions, as I said at the beginning. I even worked with OKR practitioners, and they never get it right the first time. People who are certified in doing OKRs. You know, the truth is that the day before we are recognized as, you know, geniuses, the day before we are all recognized as crazy. So if somebody says, oh, that sounds really crazy, yeah, well, probably you're in the right direction, because maybe soon enough in the near future, you might be a genius. So as a last point on this following the herd business, we actually have a pretty recent story to tell here about this, which is the iOS 14.5 that arrived and was a little bit landscape shift on iOS for us, and tracking data and installs. And so we decided, without going into much detail, because this could be a whole day's webinar, but we picked the conversion value schema with custom events. And just for context, this conversion value is kind of a very new thing in the iOS world. And the simplest one is the revenue events. And we, of course, went to the innovative custom events. And, you know, this allowed us to learn more about our players' behavior and the relationships between triggering certain events as they play the game and their spending pattern. But it turns out that it still doesn't work very well. and with several partners, attribution and UA partners, we are now working to try to understand a bit better why. And, you know, they see us as hardworking, and they see us as inspiring and pushing them to go a little bit further. So they will go to bat for us and maybe, you know, work harder in our relationship, so that's a very strong plus. Even though, you know, we broke something, we earned something bigger than what we broke. And anyway, it's a very simple fix. We just go to revenue events for now, and hopefully that will work for us. As a very final point, you know, I wanted to conclude on the note of, I had to throw something about growth in there. It's occupational hazard, just to show that, you know, we've tapered down spend as we've been working intensely on a pretty sizable new feature, but I can't really talk about it because there aren't any results yet. So I would have loved to, but it's still too early. But it might quite drastically change the game. But the point of this plot here is just to show that we seriously reduced the spend, and the organic to paid ratio died with it, as you can see, as the spend drops. And then as we maintain spend, though, at a lower level, we recovered it again. So if you don't spend, they won't come. So don't just build it and they will come. Banking on organics is a hope, and hope is not a business plan. So ultimately, what we are trying to do here is just a plain and simple arbitrage between money in and money out. Okay, all products are funnels, and at their most bare bones definition. And the beautiful content that we put around these funnels, like a special beautiful jacket, is what encourages the consumers, the players, to go through this journey of arbitrage. And making more money, you either need to grow that journey or grow the people who come in and go through that journey. There's a lot more behind everything I'm saying, but at its bare bones, this is what we care about. And we care about this journey, and we care about this wrapping around the funnel. If we do indeed care this much, and we love it, and we trust the process, and we trust the people that are around us who built it with us, even if it does break along the way to a successful story, you know, we have all certainly become a better version of ourselves, but especially the people who work around us and with us. And that is all I had to say for today. And I appreciate if people are not sleeping and maybe playing the game. And hopefully it wasn't too long and too annoying and boring.
No, it wasn't. Thank you, Filippo. I think we can, invite all people, like, Leandro and Johnatan. We have a few questions from the sessions. So actually, we can maybe I can try to present it. Actually, no. Maybe it's better, like, to put us on the screen. So like the first question, maybe, to Filippo, there was the question around like, around what actually made like, VC company invest in you. So was it hard? Was it difficult to get investment? And do you see any, like, downsides of like having the like the VC or like any other company investing in you? Like, for example, someone was like hearing that, if the VC is investing in you, then it actually puts a lot of pressure on the company. Can you share maybe a little bit of view on that?
Yeah, I was not there. I know the story, and I was there at the receiving end of the story, which was we got the Grail. But when I joined, there was already kind of work in progress, so I just kind of supported on the sidelines the efforts. And I think what was really significant was to show that the team was experienced in working together, and had built a number of important elements that were also scalable and modular in terms of backend, in terms of gaming engine, all the sort of the backbone. Okay, and then what we added to that message was also showing that funnel concept that I was sort of talking about at the end, which is, investors are smart people. They know what you're trying to do, at least, smart investors. They know that, this is gaming, it's content, it's entertainment, but it's also a business, which means, does that funnel work? Can I put, $1 in, pull the slot machine, and $2 come out on the other end? Those are the important things, the team, the tech, and does the funnel work? Does it put pressure? It depends. I think if you can't explain those three things, if the investors don't understand the business quite well, then you are in a sort of a pressure which is more about educating your investors rather than, we don't spend any time really educating our investors. We keep them up to date. We tell them what's going on. They give us a lot of very valuable feedback, but they're not asking us questions like, how does it make money? That would be not such a great fit for anyone. And there are a lot of investors, new to gaming and learning it, certainly, but let's just say that stupid money is not a good idea.
Thank you. Andrew?
Okay, that was trouble unmuting myself here. I like both Filippo and Jonathan touched on the importance of user acquisition for growing the company and growing the games. I really love the slide Filippo just shared on how don't simply lean onto organics all the time. But there's a question, actually, is the most voted one that we haven't asked, is how do you get prepared for buying users, right? Is there a specific moment during your game development life cycle, or when do you say, okay, now I can do it? Or did you prefer to start really slow and then scaling up? This both Jonathan and Filippo can then, I think both of you could answer that question.
Okay, I can give it a shot. I think as I showed on that LTV CPI slide, if you have a product, if you have a game which is running, you should be able to understand what's your LTV are, right? So just do this homework and model. Try to understand what's your lifetime value, right, per player, so that you can compare to the cost of acquiring a new player. I don't think there's a right time. I think there's a right time for you to scale your investment budget. But I believe that if you plan a company, if you have a budget to acquire, then as soon as you launch the game, you can start acquiring, right? You can start acquiring. Just manage your budget and ramp up your budget aggressively when you see that your LTV model, right? And after you make all your validations, but when you have confidence on your LTV against your cost per install, then you should ramp up, because this is where you're just making money with the game. But there's not a right time. I would say from the beginning. Start with the beginning, because there's also a learning process in terms of acquisition, right? So there are many different channels. You're gonna test channels, audiences. You're gonna test formats, creatives. I mean, there are many things to test, and it's good that you as soon as you have a game, you can start test those things as well.
Thank you. Filippo, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Jonathan was saying. I think start as soon as you can, not just because I say that for occupational hazard. It's start as soon as you can, because there is such a thing as a startup cost, that you have to understand how your numbers behave, and you have to test a lot of different things. Functionality, that the numbers are working, that they're correctly instrumented, that you're attributing somehow correctly, but also creatives and things like that. But really, it's really all about your appetite for risk. So if you don't have enough appetite, it will be difficult to kind of spend some money to gather those learnings and then move on to getting aggressive as you reach that inflection point, as Jonathan pointed out in his presentation. So if you don't have enough appetite for risk, you'll never really gonna get started, and you'll just keep building content instead, because that's the safety zone, the comfort zone.
Thank you.
And it's like, actually, that's probably more like the question to Johnatan, and I really like it. Yeah. So you had specific journey from being developer, like someone who was doing that game, to CEO, like what was most difficult? Yeah, what was like what would be differently, what you would do differently? Like Leandro was asking similar question, but maybe you kind would like even to add what kind of advices would you give to the people who are going over that journey like you did?
Yeah, I think it's a very common let's say steps. You come from the technical background and you go into the business background. Personally, I always liked the business environment, so I kind of went into technical because I also like the technical and math and this kind of stuff. But I also was very connected to the business aspect. I think that I had previous work experience that were very helpful to me, and I have to say that I did a lot of preparation in terms of human psychology, in terms of just being concerned about the other persons that are going to be working with you. So I think it's a kind of set of skills, right? If you come from a technical background, it's very common, probably you have to work your, let's say, human skills or your business skills. It's something that you should be prepare yourself. I think that's the thing, because having a strong technical background is going to be very, very helpful in your journey. definitely. So if you believe that you should work on business and the human relations skills, work on them.
And in this case, actually following on that, and actually in this case, it's both to you and to Filippo. Like, do you think is there like any specific size of the company when you need to actually as the founder actually really decide, okay, should I really follow the journey, or maybe it makes better sense, makes more sense to hire CEO, or like someone who will be just doing that for me, and I will be kind of super programmer and kind of product owner in the company, because again I know such cases as well. Yeah. So do you think is there a specific size, or like the specific moment when you need to kind of make that decision?
Well, I can also give it a shot. I think it's very subjective, right? If you how long you want to be the CEO, or if you want to delegate other tasks, it's very subjective. But one thing that really changes is the scope of your job, right? So in the beginning, you as a founder, you have to do everything, right? You have to be connected, and you have to know everything that is happening. And you realize that eventually you have to become, you'll be more specialized as well. You also become more specialized. So you'll be more concentrated on strategy, right? So top of the strategy of your company, why you're doing this, or why not doing that? What about just exploring this way? And I think it's optional, but I think these days you should be very involved in talent retention as well, right? Just for the things that I mentioned, which I think are very, very relevant. So you become you have more specific tasks, right? But about just speaking as a CEO or which kind of delegations you're going to do, I think it's very subjective. It's very case by case.
It's very hard to be a founder and have your baby and accept that you cannot be the CEO anymore, or you should stay CEO and then go through the different phases of founding stage, growth stage, exit stage. It's hard to let go, but really you don't have to. The most important thing, and this is what I think of my CEO Riku, is to be a change manager and know when to engage, hire, empower agents of change. So people in the company that can effect some change through the various stages of the company, or hire people that can influence that change. So this is what happened to me. He hired me as an agent of change so that he wouldn't have to do it. And so he gave me a lot of trust and empowerment to do that. And that speaks great volumes about the sort of founder and CEO that he is, because he didn't just say, I'll do it all on my own. He spoke with his co-founders and decided, what can we do and what can we not do, and do we have the people? But it is definitely subjective as to, how well should I go back to coding and have fun with that and trust some external hire. So it's a very tough one, and probably why I'm never going to start my own thing.
Thank you for answer.
So I actually have a question that is not there, and it's from me, Filippo and Johnatan. I mean, you're in the gaming business, so I expect you to play hard when you're not working, right? So outside of the games that you make, what's your favorite game you're playing right now, and why? Just let's make it a little bit fun here. Too much business we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think we all that work in this industry also play games, right? I mean, I'm not playing anything right now, right? But things that I've been playing recently. I have to say that I'm a big fan of the Civilization franchise, so I play all of them. Like I spend many hours playing those games. I played a title made by one guy, which is Stardew Valley. Also, my daughters play, right? So my daughters are 9 and 7. They also play Enjoy, which is amazing because I can play with them. It's a beautiful game. But yeah, I mean, sports game. I always love city building games, so I played SimCity. Spent many hours playing those games as well. But I still play. I still try to accommodate some time in the weekends or sometimes at night and play. And I think it's very important that you keep playing. When you work in this industry, you kind of sometimes you play and you have an idea, right? So you shouldn't really stop playing.
Yeah, I also am quite old, like Johnatan, so I emerged from the Civilization generation, but unfortunately, I don't have any time for that. I wish I did. Maybe I'm bad at my time management with kids and so on. What I do play a lot of is a lot of mobile games, and I'm also playing the games that the kids play because I'm really interested to understand, all the new generations of consumers, what really appeals to them and how they play these things and how they monetize. I mean, yes, it sounds like work, but it's also for fun. So I have been playing at different moments things like Roblox, and that really wouldn't be my typical game. But I do find enjoyment because it's still a game. Among Us as well, which I find incredibly annoying, but still I find some enjoyment from the annoyance, I guess. I also want to understand really if it's dangerous for my kids to be playing them. But it's really fascinating to see how, like, we're very different consumers. The guys who grew up with Civilization or Command and Conquer or things like that. I mean, I wasn't really growing up. I was already pretty grown by then. But and mobile has just so many cool things to try. That I'm not, with all respect to PC gaming, of course, but there's so many, from the stupidest game to the most hardcore game. I play a lot of Star Trek, Starfleet Command from Scopely. That's because it gets the most hardcore player out of me, really. But it's not anything like, hardcore stuff on PC, obviously. But still, there are elements to it. But then tons of other games.
That's awesome. And don't be shy. I play Roblox with my daughter as well. It's okay. We all do it. It's fun. And I appreciate those answers because, there's mobile development, and we talk about mobile games, right? And what our companies do here has grown so much that we have some, really amazingly well-developed games from, AAA titles like Genshin Impact or whatnot. Being launched, that so many possibilities now you have in the tips of your hands for people to keep playing in different moments. It's really interesting for me. So thanks for everybody answers. I'm not alone on the Roblox with the daughter game, so that's good to hear as well.
Thank you. Actually, I will maybe take this one because you mentioned about niches or more bigger areas. There's a really interesting question. Do you think it makes more sense for the smaller company to focus on tier 1 countries because they are the most important in gaming, or maybe exactly rather focus on some niches market like emerging markets that are really not big enough for bigger players, even if they are kind of harder to crack? What is kind of your view on that?
Yeah, my view on that goes along with that axis of how big is your budget, right? And if you go mainstream or niche, I think you have to ask yourself a question of what's the category of your game and what are your competitors, right? Do you have a game which is good enough to compete in the with the market, with the segment that you want to compete? But I would say I think it's easier, safer, and cheaper to go niche, right? So to find a niche and grow with this niche. But it's not a, it shouldn't stop you if you want to do, let's say, a mainstream game. It shouldn't really stop you. It's just maybe it's gonna be a little bit tougher, or you have to work a little bit harder, to get there. But that's the way I would approach.
Thank you. And Filippo, how do you think?
Was the question about the niche genre or mainstream genre or niche geos? Because the one, I mean, you mentioned genres, but the one on the page there, the Slido, is about
yes.
geos.
So actually, in this case, it was more about the niche in terms of the markets. Yeah, it's like, on one side, like,
Right.
Everyone is focusing on US, let's see, like tier 1 countries, but then there's like really strong competition there. But then on the other hand, like, you have more and more like, good successes on like, tier 2 and tier 3 countries. Yeah. So actually, even alone, I hear more and more often that, for example, like, for many smaller studios, like even Poland, for example, is getting really interesting market. Yeah, even if it's not really the big one, or it's not really like the richest one, and so on.
Yeah, Poland is great for mid-core, by the way. Not huge scale, but some pretty high value LTV for sure. But so what's really good about mobile is that you can scale globally. You have access to global scale through channels that are, the usual suspects, Facebook, Google, etc. So you are able to really reach out to a vast audience that allows you to balance between very expensive audience and cheaper audience, right? And in the cheaper audience, there are also all these small pockets of like mid-core in Poland can get you some great LTVs at a pretty cheap price. The niche, when you have like a very specific product game that is only sort of understood well in just 2 or 3 countries, that's great if it's something really popular, right? In certain countries, there are really popular games. So you can get some pretty sweet organic lifting out of that, and you don't have to worry too much of how expensive it is to acquire players. Tricky, though, with targeting, because the more refined your targeting is, typically, the more expensive it gets. So if I need to get, just players in Poland only, then I'm really really fine-tuning the targeting, and then things start getting a bit expensive because the scale is reduced. So I typically would recommend to try to go as globally as possible once you see what are your hottest countries, which typically includes the US, but you will start finding that certain geos are really strong, and you can start investing in them a little bit more with localization, with localized ads, with even maybe a local event while you're running weekly events, and really sort of try to make that geo more relevant in your mix and not depend so much in the US.
Thank you very much.
I do have an answer for that too, Marius. I know I'm not one of the game developers, but I think, small developers, if they have small budget, they might consider something that Johnatan said, and, they might consider buying users at very cheap countries, so they can buy more users instead of, going to the US directly, where one user is super expensive, right? And that might help them test a little bit more some of the, earlier characteristics of the game as they continue to develop. So it would be interesting to keep that in mind, that countries like, Brazil, Argentina, Philippines are very cheap to buy users. And then you can test characteristics and then later go on to the US a little bit more prepared, knowing that your game is not going to crash, knowing that your game has a monetization characteristic and so on. So I think that's part also of the developing journey when you think of these higher characteristics, going from, game quality, game stability into high monetization, maybe you want to test a few countries that are cheaper to buy users.
Hands down, Leandro, functionality testing should always be done that way for sure. And also integration testing. Have I instrumented the events correctly and so on? Eventually, though, you need to kind of step it up a little bit to tier 2 and then tier 1, not necessarily US. I would avoid that, to make sure that your monetization is not only working, but it's also serving a higher disposable income market. Because if your monetization is just extracting value from, smaller disposable income, that's great, but then you're not. I'm not one for whale hunting at all, but you do want to have an ability for the monetization to get some whales out of it, right?
Yeah, just on top of that, also, if you want to, you need those good players and value players to build your LTV model, right? To understand your LTV. So eventually you have to do that. You can do it slowly in the beginning, right? Or carefully, but you're going to need it. Eventually you're going to need it.
Sure. Okay, and actually we see like one last question. Leandro, would you like to ask that?
Yeah, I think both of you talked a little bit about hiring and growing the company. So we have a little question on, when is the moment for you to hire an analyst? It seems from context that company is still small, 10 people. Should we hire an analyst? Should we keep focusing on developing capabilities? What do you think about that?
Well, I would say that, just like a typical number would be that a company, especially a growing company, would spend maybe half of its expenses are going to marketing. So it's a big chunk of money. Mm-hmm. So I think you not only should hire an analyst when you start spending, but you should hire a good one, because it's going to make a huge difference to you, right? So from the moment that you really your marketing budget, let's say, is more than 10% of your expenses, you should have a very good analyst with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's more about not necessarily like how many people are in the company. How much data do you have to go through? If you have a data team already in place, that's great. But if they're overworked and clearly there is room for another person to work on this, then yes, hire. That's how I look at it. If somebody is doing 2 full-time jobs, then they're not doing both of them properly. So you need to find somebody to help you out. And if you have mountains of data, then you might be missing an opportunity, a little gold mine there, and an opportunity to optimize the game or the marketing. So it's important to find somebody that can help you optimize not just the product, but also the actual marketing, for sure. And yes, even if you're 5 people, get an analyst if you have a lot of data to go through and find those opportunities.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you really guys for your time. Just at the end, sorry, we can just mention that anyone who is listening to us, remember that you can sign up for the GameCamp newsletter. So then you will have the info about all events up to date, or you can just check out the future webinars at GameCamp website. And there is even next one happening in the next week, focus on user acquisition. So for example, like there were some questions around, is my product ready for UA, for marketing? I'm really encouraging you to join that webinar. And with that, I really I would really like to ask you for the feedback. And then I would like really to thank you, Filippo, Johnatan, and Leandro, for spending time with us, sharing your knowledge. Thank you really much, and really it's really appreciated.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marius.
Thank you. Have a good day then.
Have a good day.
Bye.